So hey everyone, just slowly starting to begin up. Hi everybody, let's just get Mel in the feed. Let's get our faces out. Let's get Mel in the feed. Mel's coming in now.
Oh,
Forget the gone. So hello everybody. Hey, how you doing, Mel? Nice to see you, buddy. So hello everybody. Welcome to Whining On, the special Whining On, where today we're going to go through the history of Westminster. We're going to talk about Westminster's engagement with street performers over the last 15 years, problems they've had, how it's failed, how Westminster seemed to have a view of seeing busking as a problem instead of seeing there being a few problem buskers. I believe Mel's got some stuff to present to us today as well.
Yep, going to be talking about Covent Garden, but I was going to do this. It's really stupid, but welcome to the Matt and Mel show.
How wonderful, Mel. If only we had a bit more preparation, it would have gone wonderfully. So me and Mel have been researching all week, but particularly cramming hard today to make sure that all the dates we've got, everything we've got is right. You'll see there's this monolithic description where I've got website references for all the stuff I'm going to talk about today. So if you want to evidence and check all the stuff I'm saying is correct, please do. Mel, where do you think we should begin this talk?
I actually started from a film, The Good, the Ugly. The good being Covent Garden, the performers and how they've worked for 40 years since 1980. The bad, Westminster. And the ugly is the big businesses who are secretly crawling about behind Westminster. It's called BID, which apparently, I have to read that, Business Improvement District. Matt can tell you more about that.
Well, we'll be talking a lot more about them as we go on, but it's definitely become apparent through the research we've done that bid groups have had a lot of influence over the last 12 years in shaping Westminster policy in a way that me and Mel would probably say is unlawful, or at least unethical, one could say.
Dystopian, using the big word against you.
Yeah, definitely dystopian. Large business interests secretly using police, using the council to essentially curate the street. They claimed, one of the big groups that we talk about later, claimed on the website that they curate acts all over their borough or over their bid district, which is quite dystopian when you think about it. A large overarching family of businesses deciding who and who doesn't get to express themselves in the street.
Well,
but I feel like we need to
call it, actually, what I looked at, and I came up with this word, it's sterilize public spaces, because they seem to, and it's apparently going on all over the country. I spoke with Dave Southern from who was on Keep Streets Live. I think that's correct. Keep Streets Live. Yeah. And they're fighting battles right across the country. Various councils, they're trying to get rid of the homeless people. They're trying to get rid of the street performers. They just want it all very nice and clinical and clean and forget about what real life's about.
Well, I think there's a kind of separation of expectation, because in the consultation that was done in January for the Westminster new policy, the licensing policy, there was somebody in there, and I believe it's a lady. I can't remember the specific name of the person, so I won't be calling you out on here. But this lady, if only, this lady wrote in the comments that she thought Trafalgar Square should be a place for quiet reflection. And, you know, I respect this person's opinion. I genuinely do. I mean, fair enough, you can have that opinion, but that was used as one of the quoted pieces of commentary by Westminster Council. And you have to think, in Trafalgar Square's history, in the, you know, how many hundred years since that column was built?
Oh, yeah, but it's better than that. Trafalgar Square has virtually no businesses on it. It's a one big square. Virtually, I don't believe there's any housing there. There's no shops, no restaurants, no cafes. It's not disturbing anybody, but we could say who it is disturbing. Or
well, yeah, we can definitely say that. But just before we go on to who we think is disturbing there, I just want to talk about this lady's expectation that Trafalgar Square should be a quiet place for reflection, okay? It's her ideological choice on what should go on in the centre of the country. It's the centre of the central city, the capital city of our country. And she believes people should be able to sit there and quietly think in silence about the world. But that's her opinion. And if she wants to try and get people to agree with that and pass a mandate for that, fair enough for her. But it's historically a nonsense. That's been a place for political meetings. It's been a place for people to join. It was a place where people would bring the animals to feed them inside the fountain. Never in the history of that square has it been a place for quiet reflection. But it seems like now we want to change the entire tradition of the Westminster Borough because some new people have moved in and got expensive flats there, potentially. I'm completely conjectural.
Square.
But no, in the surrounding area. They want to be able to walk, and when I say a surrounding area, it could be half a mile away, but they want to walk to Trafalgar Square and sit there in silence. They don't like all these people coming and creating noise in their city centre.
Yeah, but it's like just across the road, if you've got your back to the art gallery, towards the left, is a lovely church, and they've got a lovely restaurant. You can go in there and have plenty of quiet reflection. There is loads of places in the centre of London where you can quietly reflect. I mean,
there's a park. There's the
park
through the arches. It's less than 150 metres away. And there's no street performance there because it's the Queen's Park and it's completely unlawful and you will get arrested. But not on public land, not on our shared land. That top terrace was originally, when it was planned to be made into a pedestrianised area, it had a street performer doing a street show in their original plans. Ken Livingstone put it there specifically to encourage street entertainment, because people didn't want to work down the bottom because there were too many pigeons. Which I suppose I was thinking maybe you could start with a brief bit of Covent Garden, but we seem to have talked about Trafalgar quite early on. So I think I'll plough into the beginning with Trafalgar. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but there used to be thousands of pigeons there. There was on average, I think, 4,000 pigeons in Trafalgar Square.
4,001.
Yeah, 4,001. And there was a policy from the GLA in Westminster to reduce the number of pigeons there. And so eventually, through trying to reduce it, they outright banned feeding pigeons. They made it unlawful. If you fed a pigeon in Trafalgar Square, you'd be breaking the law. And they did that in 2007. Now, I'd gone in 2006 and I tried to perform in Trafalgar Square. I tried to do a show on this North Terrace. It seems like the most perfect place you could ever imagine designed for street performance. And when I started to do the show, a guy who's a pigeon feeder, and the way he made his money was he'd keep a bag of rice on him. When tourists would arrive, he'd put a grain of rice on a tourist's arm, just like that. A pigeon would land on the arm because it's used to this now. It knows what's going on, eat the rice. The tourist would get a picture. The pigeon would fly off, and then the guy would say, give me some money for it. And so when I start doing a show, he walks up to me and he throws 1,000 grains of rice in front of me. 1,000 pigeons land. You move, pigeons fly up, fly down, they go. You can't do nothing. You had to give up. And so literally, as soon as I heard they'd banned pigeon feeding, a week later, and that's why I know it's 2007, because it's literally a week after they banned the pigeon feed. And I went down there and I thought, right, I'm going to do a show there now. And from the off of doing shows there, police officers would have come up to you and they'd say, you can't be here. Council wardens would occasionally come up to you and say, you can't be here, and then muddle through different pieces of legislation, wrongly interpreting them. And because I'm a stubborn bugger, I checked the laws they said, and I learned that you couldn't, and a few other people did the same thing. And over the years, by about 2010, we now have quite a lot of people working there. We have a queue. There's 5 or 6 people regularly waiting to queue up to do shows. There's statues that are formed on the side. There's a couple of people doing pavement drawing. It became what it was designed to be. It became a place for street culture, for street art, for public performance and public art.
A place that creates community. So you would get lots of tourists from all over the world, plus Great Britain. And people congregate there and they get the chance for free. So if you've got money, you can watch it. If you haven't got money, you can watch it. It's democratic to everybody. It meant that it gave a big atmosphere to that area, which can be a bit devoid of any atmosphere.
Well, when we started working there, it was, I'll tell you this now, completely dead. Completely dead. There was nobody there. It would take me about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes to gather a crowd of people. And by 2010, I gather a crowd of people in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Because what had happened is it become a place for culture. It become a place that would gather people together and hold people there, sustain people in an area. You know, there would be a shared community, and it became an attraction.
It gets people to enjoy being in the space. It gets people, they go down and look at the fountain and everything else. They can see the column, they can see down towards down.
You can see the lions, Nelson column, yeah.
Everything. Also, which will come in later, when people are hanging out there and seeing things, they see the art gallery behind it all, and there'll be quite a lot of people who will go, oh, wonder what that building is, because a lot of people actually don't know, and they'll go, oh, I'll go and have a look. Well, it's an art gallery. It's a beautiful art gallery, and it's free to go in. It's free, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it is free.
Yeah.
Yes, it's paid for by the state.
So we're actually, not we, but street performers, street artists, all the rest are actually helping give some footfall into that art exhibition. So instead of it being a certain group of people who go to art exhibitions, it pulls in people who don't usually go to art exhibitions or art galleries.
I tell you this 100% without question, there's more people there in 2010 held in the area, coming to the area, staying in the area than there was in 2007. And it was around 2009, 2010 that Westminster Council began to step up their attempts to remove people from the area. And so what they started doing is they started coming down with this bylaw called the No. 2 bylaw. And it says, no person shall create a sound which is so loud, continuous or repetitive as to give reasonable cause for annoyance when asked by a council official or a member of the public to stop. And they waved this piece of paper with this notice around to every person there, even statues. People who were doing silent acts, they were showing this piece of legislation and just pointing at the £500 fine and telling them they had to go.
Who were the people? Was it policemen?
Westminster Council. It was Westminster Council wardens.
So Westminster Council wardens, okay.
Yeah. And it was obvious to my eyes that time that they were told to go down there and clear the entire area. It's become a eyesore. There's too many people there. We don't want this here. Go and clear the entire area. And they were wholesale going down and showing this No. 2 bylaw to everyone. It was, as we will talk about again and again and again, it was a crackdown. They came to crack down on busking. They was said, right, the gallery doesn't like this here, potentially. That's complete, you know, that may be true, it may be not. But, you know, for some reason or another, they decided they didn't want busking here. And I think the general...
They want to sterilise the area. And all, you know, because when you get something like that, you get a whole host of different sorts of people, some of whom they will class as undesirables. And it's not right. It's not right. It's not our society. It's not London. London is a multicultural society full of all sorts of people, and they wanted to cut that out. Can I go back a stage, actually?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Because what we've both talked about, if I can see the date, because we can go right back. Where was it? Oh my God, what was that legislation way back when the Vagrancy Act?
1824 Vagrancy Act. I actually did a bit more research on it today because I've had to respond to it. We will mention it more later on, but it talks about arms, ALMS, gathering arms, basically begging to ask for money for nothing.
Yeah, and so we can see a history of where people in power, in government or whatever, local government, have tried to stop things happening, try to stop people being able to express themselves, try to stop people being able to earn an income. And certainly in the vagrant period.
Well, believe it or not, that was set up. Switching my microphone over. That was set up during the time just after the Napoleonic War. It was set up specifically to deal with people who were coming from being soldiers in Europe and who would, it mentions deformities in it, don't expose deformities with a will to gather arms or bear arms. It talks specifically about soldiers who came and were homeless in the streets of London. It's quite a heartless piece of legislation, even for 1824.
even for 1824. But we can see a history. We can see a history of how that continued. So I was reading up, what was it? It was about the period 1960, 1970. There was a group which I particularly am fond of. What was it? I have to read their name. They were called the Road Stars. And they used to do a couple of dance acts. I believe one was based on, because I've done it, a Lauren Hardy routine, and another one which I've also done, which was based on Wilson, Keppel and Betty, which was a cod Egyptian sand.
They call it the sand dance, yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't legal in Leicester Square, and the Road Stars used to be chased by the police. And there's also,
but this is the sad irony, is it was legal in Leicester Square back then. The same way it was legal in 2007. It was legal. There was nothing. The law hasn't changed.
But they were just being chased off.
Well, it's because for some reason people had not figured this idea. They'd not looked at it. So, for example, in the Vagrancy Act, it says no one should bear arms. Now, as soon as I got accused of being a beggar and someone told me the Vagrancy Act, the police officer in Trafalgar Square accused me of it, said, you know, mate, bearing arms, showing your arms, trying to get money. Of course, he didn't have a bloody clue what the law was about. So I went and looked at this bloody law. And when you look at the law, it says ALMS, arms. I'd never heard of it. I'd only heard of it from, the Bible occasionally, but it was so long ago, I couldn't remember what that bloody meant. So I looked in Black's Legal Dictionary. It's one of the legal standard dictionaries for the UK.
Yeah.
And arms, ALMS, means to give a virtue, to give and receive nothing in return. So what became quickly apparent is that the sand dance, people will pay to get you in their venue doing that. It's entertaining. Entertainment has a value. If you buy a DVD with someone doing the sand dance on it, you're not buying the plastic. You're buying the entertainment value of that DVD. Entertainment has a value. When you entertain on the street, when you perform on the street, you give something of return.
Just butt in for 1 second.
Yeah.
The Road Stars were actually booked a few times by Prince Philip to perform for him at the same time as they were being chased off Leicester Square.
Is this the story when they hid in a bar? They ran off and hid in a bar, and the police were waiting outside the bar for him.
Yes.
I mean, there's been a long history of this. And with the invent of camera phones, it's really changed the way that policing happened, because you can hold police and you can hold authority to account a little more. Even when we look, and if we draw ourselves back to Trafalgar Square, what happened in the Trafalgar Square is they pushed a lot of buskers off. A lot of people left the square because of the crackdown. Reasonable people, statues, people who weren't making any noise whatsoever, they were creating no problem, were pushed out of the area because Westminster Council didn't believe that was a thing that should happen in a public place. And so what happened eventually is a few of us decided, some of the Covent Garden performers who've had a little bit more experience historically, as you can talk about a little bit, of resisting and so I got myself arrested. I refused to stop. I said, no, well, arrest me.
Where was that?
That's in Trafalgar Square. And the date of me getting arrested was, let me double check my dates. I think it was 2011. I got arrested in Trafalgar Square.
Was that near the Olympics?
It might have been. It was just before the Olympics, the year before. Yeah. So it could have been, in fact, 2010. It was 2010, 2011 that I got arrested there for accused of breaching the number 2 bylaw. And so what happened with that was, just like they did anywhere, they brought the council down. The council went to every busker there, handed these things out, told them they couldn't be there. And I said, well, I'm not going to stop. They came, they arrested me. We went through court. I went to magistrates court. In magistrates court, I got found guilty, but I got given a conditional dismissal. So a conditional dismissal in magistrates courts is basically them saying, we don't want to deal with this. Send it to a higher court. So I did. I appealed it to the Crown Court. And in the Crown Court, the judge gave the verdict of saying that a council official can't claim he's annoyed. Even if someone tells him no in and of themselves, that's annoying in and of itself. You need a complaint from a member of the public. And once you have a complaint from a member of the public, then we can clearly say that an annoyance is being created. And so once that happened, once that challenge was done, Trafalgar Square was kind of set up as a safe zone. The council never came back there. to crack down, so to speak. And they never, to my experience, apart from Operation Spotlight, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, they never use that law again, despite the fact that that law is quite a reasonable law. It's written fairly well. It's used across the country. That writing of that bylaw, it's a local Westminster bylaw. It is in the description if you want to check the writing of the bylaw. It's used all the way from here to Scotland as bylaws. In Scotland, it's one of the national laws. It's not badly written. And if you evidence it reasonably, you can use that law to deal with people who are being too loud.
All right. I want to emphasize this point. What you're saying is quite clearly there is legislation that's in place. If someone is doing something that is not acceptable in any of these performing spaces, they can be told to leave. They can be arrested potentially. It's
more
there.
than that. So what has to happen is there has to be a complaint. There has to be a complaint from a member of the public, someone living in a residence, someone in a business. That complaint then has to be reasonable. It has to be a reasonable annoyance.
So let's say they were playing extremely loudly.
Yes. So it says no person shall create a sound which is so loud. Well, after 9 o'clock is a different law.
Okay.
So if you're going to talk about after 9 o'clock, I will get to my
Let's go back
things.
before 9 o'clock then.
So if we go before 9 o'clock, I've got my notes with me now, so I can double check. So if we go before 9 o'clock, let's say that I'm playing outside a business, and inside the business, they can barely hear each other talk. They can barely hear the person say something, or they can hear, but they have to really concentrate. It's really difficult because of the noise. That person is reasonably annoyed. The sound is so loud and so continuous that they can't easily do their job. Reasonable annoyance. So all the council official has to do with that is go take a statement from that person, write their own statement, go and ask the person to stop doing it. And if they don't stop doing it, then they can give them up to a £500 to £5,000 fine, and they can seize their equipment. The law's in place. But what happens time and time again, as we'll talk about in this interview, time and time again. I want to
make that clear. It's a really important point. They have the possibility, it's all in the legislation. If you're performing and doing something that is, for example, a nuisance, you're too loud, they can stop you. It's clear. And they
100%. But you know what? I put this in the description, and this is the word we have. These are the phrases we have to keep thinking about, okay? They see busking as a problem. They don't see problem buskers. When they go and try and deal with anything, they deal with things in crackdowns. Rather than looking at people creating a problem and dealing with those specific people, they only seem to be able to deal with the law in terms of a broad brush approach. And when they use those broad brushes, they lose in court, and then they feel disempowered.
Matt, I would just want to make a few things clear. So we've got this legislation in place that before 9 o'clock, that the offending person can be dealt with. Now, there is no 100%. Problem. Okay, let's
just
go.
Very basic evidencing.
Let's go to after 9 o'clock.
Okay, so after 9 o'clock, if someone performs after 9, they're breaking a countrywide law. The Control of Pollution Act, 1974, Section 62, says that no person shall operate a loudspeaker between the hours.
I love it because because I've seen you do it. The police come over to you to try and stop you, and you quote a law, and they're dumbstruck because they don't know the law.
But it's not just that I can quote the law, but it's that I operate within that law. I'm behaving reasonably. If I am contravening that law, it doesn't matter how well I know it. It doesn't matter whether you've got a complete photographic memory of every law under the sun. If you're being unreasonable, you can be dealt with, and you should be dealt with. And I don't think the issue is knowing the law necessarily.
Let me get you to say it again because I want all of this very clear. After 9 o'clock, what's the legislation that
it's the Control of Pollution Act 1974. It's Section 62, and it says that no person shall operate a loudspeaker between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. So 9 p.m. at night right through to 8 p.m. in the morning. It also says that you can't use a loudspeaker for advertising in public.
So that's now we know clearly that before 9 and after 9, Westminster can stop people who would be the people who would create complaints. Very clear.
I don't have it here, but there's also a Westminster bylaw which says exactly the same thing. So there's two laws. There's two laws that have the same word and that can do the same thing, that they could deal with it easily without an issue. It's already against the law. It's not a problem. The problem isn't that they don't have powers to deal with this. It's they don't have will to. It's the thing I'm going to say again. They deal with crackdowns. They look at a problem and they go, right, strong initiative. We're going to send people out, hand these things out like Smarties. We're going to deal with this problem. Instead of having this slow, methodical, reasoned will to remedy problems that are happening. So if someone's too loud, if people are too loud, right, we're going to go, we're going to well evidence, we're going to find the people who are too loud and we'll deal with them. We'll talk with the buskers, we'll work with the people, work with the stakeholders, and we'll get some decent convictions. No, that doesn't happen. What happens is they take a piece of legislation and they ram it down everybody's neck instead of trying to actually take problems and solve them. Okay. I think there's a lot more evidence of this as we go along.
Yeah. So what we got clear is they have the ability to deal with performers now. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we've seen regularly is that Westminster Council, for whatever reason, are not dealing with these people, and consequently there are complaints. Many of the complaints, as we've seen, are about noise, especially after 9 o'clock. Westminster Council are not doing anything about this problem. And the people who are complaining are the residents, the taxpayers. And we both would agree, if you go and choose to live in Covent Garden or Leicester Square, okay, just like if you go to live next to an airport or a railway station, you know that there will be a certain amount of noise. You know, if you live in London, the centre of London, the heart of London, there will be noise. But we both agree, and I know we both agree, after 9, the resident or anybody else shouldn't have to put up with this problem of noise. Why should they? Why should they get this noise coming into their home when they're either wanting to sleep or watch their telly program or whatever?
I'll go further than that. I'll go further than that. I don't think that noise should go into their home at all. You know, I think that if a resident opens their windows and they can hear a slight sound of the street below, the hustle and bustle, fair enough. If they open the window and they can hear a slight sound, a din in the background of a show, fair enough. But if they turn on their television and have it at a reasonable volume and the sound from outside is competing with that, I think that's too much.
Yeah,
I think that should be dealt with, and I think there's laws in place to do that. I'd say even during the day. I'm quite. I think that we have to engage reasonably and we have to have balance with all the people around us. And part of that is not creating a sound which is so loud, continuous, or repetitive as to give reasonable cause for annoyance. It's a fair law. I want to move on a little bit with that if I can as well. So they've not used that court ruling, that they've not used the number 2 bylaw, as far as I'm aware, since 2013, since my court ruling. So that's 7 years now. They've not used that law, and it's completely viable if they do a tiny bit of evidence checking. But what they have done, there's been numerous crackdowns that have gone on since then. So one of the ones I want to put particular focus on, we'll be talking about it quite a lot because there's a lot of quite shocking elements to it, is a certain crackdown they did. Let me check my notes. They did this crackdown in 2014 and they called it Operation Spotlight. It was in Leicester Square. And what happened was Holber, Hertford London Business Improvement District or Business Association.
Oh, you told me about this today. It's awful.
Yeah. They paid to have a police serial go to the area and essentially crack down. And I've posted inside the description. I'll check all the links work after the videos in case they don't. It's quite a weird medium trying to put the links in there. What's happened is Holber have paid the police. The police have gone to the area and they were using laws like the Metropolitan Police Act 1839, section 51, subsection 14, which talks about people using horns or other noisy instruments to gather a crowd, hawk, to try and ply trades or any of these other things. It's a law that's over 150 years old, completely taken out of context. It's to stop people using horns to advertise that they're selling stuff. It has no context to stopping performance. It's actually taken out of context to stop performance. My experience is, because I heard this crackdown was happening, and I'd just come back off this victory in Trafalgar Square, so I was feeling quite full of myself. Me and a friend went down there with a camera, and I banged my box until the police came. And I said, right, film all this, get this all. And I was there for 40 minutes, and I went through the PC that was there at the time, who, bless her, was completely out of her depth. She said, you can't do it. And I went, why? She went, you can't do it. I went, why? She went, bylaws. I went, what bylaw? And she said, the bylaws. And I said, well, look, unless you can tell me the law that you're going to arrest me for, I'm going to begin. Now, if you can't tell it me, this is all on camera, I'm going to start. Can you please tell me why you're going to arrest me? And she went, right, I'll get the sergeant and you'll be sorry. So, okay, please get the sergeant. And the sergeant went through multiple laws. He went through the Vagrancy Act, the one we just talked about, that set for the Napoleonic War, and claimed I was begging. So I gave him the description I gave everyone earlier about the Black Seagull Dictionary and arms. Now it doesn't apply. He claimed blockage of the Highways Act 1980. I had to go through it with him, explain that it talks about stopping free movement of the area. So if someone can move around my crowd and still freely move through the street from A to B, I'm not blocking a highway. Otherwise, us having this conversation in the street right now is a blockage of the highways. Of course, that's a nonsense interpretation. He went through the Metropolitan Police Act. He tried to use a number 2 bylaw. In the end, the head of Westminster Enforcement arrived on the scene and stopped 20 feet away from me, recognised me, put his head in his hands and went like this. And the sergeant walked back to me with a big smile, shook my hand and said, you can carry on working. Now, that's a nice story from me, but what's more concerning about it is that I've gave examples of a couple of people. Multiple people were arrested. Many people, I think it was about 10 people, got arrested during this crackdown in the 3 or 4 months that it was actually working before it all collapsed. People lost their liberty for a crackdown. For what reason? Because the Heart for London bid saw there was a steep rise of performers coming to the area and they didn't want them there. They talk about a couple of instances of nuisance. So someone played too loud, someone blocked a doorway. These things are genuine problems that can be dealt with by the law. Instead of having that serial stopping every busker in the area and trying every single law and going through this whole dictionary list of laws to try and just get people to mime a language, bugger off. If they actually were being strategic, talking to the people there in the area, and then going and dealing with the people who were blocking doorways, which is a minority of people doing, dealing with the people who were too loud, what would have evolved out of that situation? Holber's money that they spent to the police to pay for this serial, which I think is, to be honest, abhorrent anyway, the fact that a private business interest can pay for policing. But the money they spent, if they would have dealt with it in that way, would have created a better culture. But what did they do? They tried to do it with everyone and they lost, because you can't do that with everyone. The law's not designed to work for every single person. So when they lose, they then feel disempowered and nothing happens and it becomes like a Wild West.
So we could go on and on and on. Your argument is, and I want to get this point, you to explain it, when they've done crackdowns, it works for a short period of time and then it doesn't work. Can you explain what's going on there and why crackdowns don't work, or why they haven't worked historically in the last 30 years or whatever, 20 years?
All the crackdowns that I've seen over the last 15 years, what happens with them is the meek people, who tend to be the people who are creating no problem whatsoever anyway, they get scared and they leave. And that's the idea of this crackdown. The idea of crackdowns is to scare people out of the area because you're being forceful. But then a couple of people who know about the law and who want to reasonably use the public space defend themselves. And the second they defend themselves and it goes to court, because the laws are obviously being misused to give a sense of threatening, inferred authority to remove people from the area, they lose in court. And then because they lose in court, the council then panics because huge payouts happen after court cases. I personally didn't claim a payout after my court case because it was, just after 2008, and I didn't feel it was the right thing to do to take a lot of state money at the time. I might rethink that now if it happened again, to be honest. I feel like maybe that was a mistake, but that's the choice I made at the time. A lot of people would have claimed for payouts and Westminster Council would have lost a huge amount of money. And then they'd lose power through those negative court judgments. And so what happens is time and time again, you have a crackdown and then they recede. They stop the crackdown because it's obviously not working. It's creating more hassle than it's worth for them.
and then they do nothing. And so the people who are creating issues, the people who are too loud, the people who do block doorways, those people can then act with impunity, because the reasonable people have stood and fought for their freedom. The laws that are meant to be used for them are then not used for them. Westminster tries an all or nothing approach time and time and time again. And the people who want to take the piss in the nothing time.
So
it's frustrating.
Let's get this right. So they've got the laws.
Yeah.
They don't use them. They then use crackdowns. They don't work.
Well, because they're bending the laws really into a shape that they're not meant to fit.
So it's all really clear that in our experience, both of us, Westminster Council just don't learn. And I actually wait a minute, because it's very interesting. But where is it? Where is my note? 2015, there was a woman working for Westminster Council called Kate Smith, and she seriously looked at the problem, and she came down and talked to performers in Covent Garden, and I believe that was Pete Dobby, Andy Christie and Mark Rothman. They had long chats, and she tried to understand what goes on in the street, and she ended up saying that rather than being a problem, street performers were a massive street resource that Westminster should be cheering on. But the other thing she did, which is interesting, which comes from Covent Garden, and we'll come on to Covent Garden a bit later, but Pete Dobbin, Andy Christie, Mark Rothman showed Kate Smith a code of conduct that had been created in Covent Garden. Code of conduct, which everybody agrees to, says you can be this loud or not that loud. You have to do this. You can't do that. It's a whole series of rules that street performers have to abide by. And in Covent Garden, they created that in relation with the Covent Garden management, and it's worked. Now, Kate Smith, working for Westminster Council, took that code of conduct and changed it a bit and created a code of conduct, and it had been created from the street performers at Covent Garden and Covent Garden management. Then, lo and behold, Kate Smith goes, Westminster do not put that into practice. So you've got something that's been created. It's based on historical knowledge and real knowledge. Kate Smith had really investigated the whole thing properly, not some sham. And then lo and behold, 5 years later, they're holding a consultation. It makes absolute no sense, because if they could work it out in 2015, why 5 years later do they then have to do a new consultation? Why couldn't they have read what Kate Smith already worked on?
Well, this is speculation here. This is speculation, but I suspect that organisations like Heart of London and the North Bank, they want to have a lot more power over the streets than they do, and then the British culture traditionally would allow them to have. They want to be able to curate what happens in the public places, and they are very powerful. I think that Heart of London, they have £4.6 billion worth of yearly contributions into the economy. Massive influence. So when they lean on Westminster,
hang on, because my point is that there was a reasonable way of dealing with it. Westminster Council have chosen not to go with the reasonable way. Whatever they're doing now, I'm not sure what their interests are or what their motivation is. But
let's just talk another little bit about what they haven't done. So there was a thing which started up in 2015 called Busking London. It was a GLA project, a blessed funded organisation that was aiming to make London more hospitable for buskers. It was trying to stop all these crackdowns that were happening by Westminster Council and trying to deal with it better. Now, they had their own problems. They're a music PR company. I've left their link in the doobly-doo, so, check them out if you want to. They didn't really understand what street performance was or how it worked. They didn't understand street culture. One of the things that they put inside their initial documents, which I've also shared and do, was they wanted to bring 500 new buskers to London every year. They saw it as being like X factor, the more the better. They wanted to drown the city with buskers, which has its own problems. But one of the things they did do was they took money from Heart for London, Holber. They took money from North Bank, from Westminster Council, and they put street wardens on the street. And these street wardens would go and they try and organise, and they tried to set up pitches, which is something I have a problem with anyway. You know, the fact that you move everyone to these small areas, you know, designated safe zones, I don't think is great. I think some work is beautiful and works well in its own space, site-specific work, animation in public spaces. But aside from that, these wardens, these liaison officers, they gathered evidence on, I think it was a group of 5 or 6 separate groups, all individuals that were problem makers. They were people who were regularly too loud. There were people who were abusive. Out of the hundreds of people in London, they found 5 or 6 people that really needed to be dealt with. And they handed the evidence over to Westminster. They wanted to work with Westminster for it, and Westminster did nothing, to the point where the entire system collapsed. And I believe my own conjecture on this is that Westminster wanted that system to collapse. Westminster's goal was originally to remove all busking apart from Covent Garden. They wanted to get rid of it everywhere. Hence why you had the crackdowns. Hence why you had Holber, Westminster Council allowing Holber to pay police to remove everyone from Leicester Square. They saw busking, as they put inside their documentation, inside the policy meeting that's there with Holber, they describe it as having an influx of performers, beggars and buskers. And they saw it as an antisocial thing in and of itself, people doing this. So they wanted to get rid of all of it. Now, we win battles over and over again. So they begin to accept they can't get rid of all of it. So what they do is they begin to change tactic. Busking London come and they say, look, we can sort this out. We'll control this for you. We'll make this manageable for you. Speak to them in language they understand. But they still think, no, we still want to get rid of it. They let Busking London collapse. And it does collapse. And, you know, I wasn't helpful with Busking London. I thought the project had a huge amount of problems. I wasn't up for having a music PR company run the streets. I think the streets shouldn't be run by anyone. I think the streets should be organised between the people using them, the stakeholders. Everyone should find ways to negotiate and work with each other. But I don't think there should be one big overarching organisation making loads of cash from doing it.
And on that point, we know that from 1980 to 2020 in Covent Garden, there has been a system that works, and it's been developed over years. And instead of turning to that system, Westminster are trying to create their own system without even understanding, without even really sitting down with the Covent Garden street performers and the management there and seeing what we've done in the past. They do not do that. They do a sham, and it is really a sham consultation process.
Let's be honest. They did talk with us. They did talk with us. We had meetings. I've been a rep for the Westminster Street Performers Association. They did sit and have meetings. What they did a couple of years ago is they had meetings and we presented the ideas. We said, look, much like with Busking London, we will give you evidence. We will support. We will give witness testimony to support the conviction of people being unreasonable. We will work with you. We will liaise with you and with local businesses and residents to find a system and to find a way of managing everything so it works. Just like in Covent Garden, we offered them that. They didn't want it. There was no will for it.
Yes,
they were just happy.
That's my point. It's a whole point. I mean, this is crazy. Westminster have this possibility. They've heard this possibility. They even had someone called Kate, I mentioned before, Kate Smith. She worked with them. She worked for them. And so, but what I'm getting at,
Westminster's not one thing, though. You got to remember, it's not one organised. It's not one body. You know,
the consultation process is a sham because it's
of course it is.
It's already happened. They already know all of this. They have the history. Either they don't look at it. Either they're incompetent. What's going on?
Well, look, 2 years ago, they tried to get licensing in the borough, and they pushed it hard, the elements in the borough. So what you've got is you've got Andrew, I didn't have time to get his last name. I desperately tried to search for it now, but he's the head of street enforcement at the moment. His name's Andrew something. We'll get it and I'll put it in the doobly-doo for people after. And you've got Rebecca Gordon, who's the head of policy. You've got Kirsty Munro, head of policy there as well. They've been pushing hard for this. They don't want to have to do the hard effort to deal with some problems.
Hang on, let's mention their names again. The people who are actually trying to stop
the
street performers. Let's know
the main driving force. The main driving force in this is Rebecca Gordon. She's the one who's heading this policy. And the next step down from her, the person who's preparing the documents, the person doing all the paperwork, is a girl called Kirsty Munro. And both of them, whenever we've negotiated with them, have negotiated in utter bad faith. We've talked to them, we've presented ideas to work with them, and all they've gone is they've said, right, give us all your data and we'll think about it. And all you know that when they're doing that is they just want to get more tools to get what they want through. 2 years ago, they had tried to put a license
for Westminster residents, the people who come and visit all the parts of Leicester Square and Covent Garden, that these people that you've just named have to speak publicly, not just behind closed doors. They're getting away with doing things that are just not right.
Well, it's going to change the nature
behind the closed doors.
It's going to change the nature of public spaces in London forever. You know, I know you said when we talked before you thought it was too apocalyptic to say this, but it's the truth. Someone's kid could walk on the street now and try and play guitar on the street and get arrested because they don't have a license to busk in the street. Someone can stand up and do some public oratory, can stand up and speak. And if this license goes through, those people standing up and speaking in public will potentially be breaking the law for expressing themselves in public. If what they do is entertaining, if it gathers people who watch them doing it, they are breaking the law. It's unbelievable the way public spaces are going to go in the city.
My anger again. It's only last Friday, me and you, we were at Covent Garden, and I said I'll go home, but it was too early. I didn't want to go potentially onto a crowded tube and be very close to people, even wearing a mask. So I wanted to go home a bit later. So I decided to walk from Covent Garden to Warren Street, and we both agreed. Well, you said you had Tricky with you. By the way, Matt's got Tricky. It's a brilliant Alsatian, which we all love, and the most incredibly well-behaved Alsatian.
Well, as a side note, you're not allowed to, if you have the licensing in, we're not allowed to loiter around the pitches, and we're not. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Maybe you should talk about this bit first, and we can talk about that after.
Absolutely. So we're walking along, minding our business. Tricky's behaving himself as well, and he's useless guard dog, isn't he? He's the most useless guard dog, but he's a brilliant dog. And we get up to Leicester Square tube station, and Matt says to me, I think I hear a busker from here, and it's quite loud. And I went, yeah, I think so. We walked along a bit further, saying, yeah, it is really quite loud. We get to this busker who's playing a piano and singing. Matt turns round to me and says, it's hurting my ears.
Yeah.
I mean, it was nuts. It was completely nuts. He was getting really carried away. He was playing his piano. The whole thing was moving. He was shouting. He was really into it. But he had no respect for the area, no respect for other performers, no respect for keeping the whole area as an entertainment area. He just wanted to do what he wanted to do. And
so this is the thing I think that Andy, the guy who's
on this walk. Yeah. So we go a bit further along Leicester Square, and now there is, I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were break dancers. They were doing very little, but they had a speaker amplifier. Music was turned up really loud. We go further. We get to Piccadilly Circus. There is another pair not doing much with a speaker, very loud again. And what really gets my goat is that where are Westminster Council? Where are the wardens? Why aren't they stopping this? It really gets my goat. And as we said before, I'm going to repeat it. There is legislation to deal with it. They're just choosing not to deal with it. And
well,
so
look at this.
People are complaining and people complain and nothing happens, and they complain again. Imagine what it's like to be a resident at Covent Garden or Leicester Square or somewhere else in that area. You phone up and nobody does anything, and the noise continues. That is so annoying. We really have to make this clear. It's really annoying.
This guy, the head of enforcement for Westminster, he said inside the January 20th committee report on busking, he turned around and said that the issue with dealing with buskers is if you get rid of one, another one just comes and takes their place with the same behaviour. And paraphrasing, that's essentially what he said. It's a major misunderstanding of the community and the culture of busking. Buskers are savvy. They're not stupid. Even the idiots are savvy to it. If people get arrested for being unreasonable, people change their behaviour. It's not the one will take their place and do the same thing. People do and push to the extent that they can. The people who are going to take the piss will take the piss as much as you allow it. And because they've got this opinion that the only way to deal with it is by having absolute, power. It's by having a crackdown where you get rid of everyone, or it's by having a license where you can control everyone. That's the only way to deal with it. Yeah, it's a major misunderstanding to the way our community works. Yeah, if you arrest a couple of people for doing that, people would stop.
What we said before with Kate Smith working for Westminster, she actually came out there, began to understand the culture, learned from the street performers, and created something which would have been a resource if they damn well used it.
But we have another guy who did this. There's a guy who became the Busker enforcement officer, dedicated Busker enforcement officer. And he got described by the upper echelons in Westminster Council as going native, because he started going, well, most of the complaints, and you have to remember, they've put on their site that there's 3,897 complaints in 2 years. It's about 5 or 6 complaints a day. It's not that many to deal with. And even them, when speaking with this guy, who I won't name because he's a lovely chap and I don't want to ruin his future job prospects, but when we spoke with him, he said majority of these complaints were busker spotting. There were people being reasonably volumed that were just, people would call up and say, there's a busker there, deal with it. Because some people have the idea that buskers are illegitimate, that they shouldn't be there. In this day, we're still at the point where we deal with bigotry for people performing culture on the street. And Westminster Council put up that they've had 3,897 complaints, not saying how many of them are verified, not saying how many are checked. I've gone through their list of complaints. It took ages to do that. Gone through the entire list of their complaints. About 700 of those complaints are between the times of 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning, through the night time, already against the law. There was another about 1,000 of those complaints, which, to be honest, appeared just to be busker spotting. So we're almost at half of those complaints being rubbish. So then we're at 3 complaints, 3 genuine complaints a day. Are you telling me the complete enforcement capability of Westminster Council is not able to deal with 3 genuine complaints a day? Take the complainant statement, go to the busker, ask them to turn down, walk away, sit in the background, see if they're genuinely doing. If they don't, they can deal with them. Is that beyond their power? No, it's not. But yes, what we do find ourselves in is
it is beyond their power, because for some unknown reason they're choosing not to do anything. But they're willing. They're willing to spend money on doing a consultation and then trying to set up a license scheme, which costs an arm and a leg, instead of using the same money to stop the rogue, the noisy performer.
Well, let's go for another example of them cracking down. So in 2016, if you notice, there's quite consistency to their crackdowns, to their attempts to remove all buskers. So in 2010, they start using the number 2 bylaw. This fails. Instead of using the number 2 bylaw more carefully, they just stop using it. In 2014, Operation Spotlight goes to the area. Loads of people are arrested. They're using every law they possibly can to remove people from the Holborn area, from the heart of London Business Association area. That fails. Government come down because there's an outcry, because people are getting arrested for 1839 laws, 1824 laws that have very little to do with street performance, because the initiative is to remove people from the area, not to remedy nuisance. And then we get to 2015, Busking London come in. They evidence actual problem makers, and instead of dealing with those problem makers, they leave it be. Because that's not a crackdown. That's not how they understand how to operate. They thought just let Busking London do whatever they want to do, and that'll work itself out. It involves hard work and actual well-trained officers doing their jobs properly. And that is, for them, I think, unimaginable at this moment. It's something we have to, I believe, as a busking community and as a world, as a London community of residents and businesses, for the good of everybody, we have to compel them to do. And so another example of this now is 2016.
Wait. It seems to me what they might be trying to do is to create what some people call a moral panic. In other words, there's these undesirables, they're coming into this area and they're causing problems. It's terrible, morally it's wrong. And that seems to be that they're trying to manufacture a moral panic, and that could be the reason why they are not using the powers to stop the people who are being excessively noisy.
Potentially. I mean, once again, I've posted in a doobly-doo an article which talks about this, and it says that the head of police turned around and said that busking increases crime, and then had to step back on it by saying, well, I've got no evidence of that. It's just, it's bigotry. It's a bigotry for people to work on the street, for street culture. So in 2016, there's a guy, and I will name him, he's a councillor in Richmond, I believe. His name's James Joyce, and he was a council warden, and he's one of the Westminster Council's
the famous James Joyce.
Yeah, and so
he gets with the famous author.
No, not at all. And so he comes and he uses a brand new law that was made in 2014 called the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Bill 2014, and it has something in it called a community protection notice. Now, he believes, because he has impact reports from Holber, from Heart of London Business Association, the business improvement district for the West End ward, he says, because I've got their impact statements, I can now say that anybody using an amplifier in this entire area is now creating a problem, and starts handing out community protection notices saying, if you perform here again, you'll be breaking the law. Little girls with little tiny amplifiers that can barely make enough sound to reach outside of the crowd are being issued community protection notices. Myself, when I'm being very careful with my volume, all the local businesses have no issue with me, handed a community protection notice. Now, I go to James Joyce, and I've looked at, and once again included in doobly-doo, I've got the Chartered Institute on Environmental Health practice notes on using CPNs, the body that trains him and licenses him. I've got their practice notes on how it's supposed to be used. And I go through it with him, and you can see he's glazed over. He's just like, well, my impact statement says that I can do this. So once again, it's more evidence of Westminster Council trying to deal with everyone with a broad brush for the will of a large.
I've noticed with him, he's allegedly, well, I've seen him, he has very little people skills. He does not know how to approach people. I believe, wasn't it the case that he made some street performer young woman cry
multiple times
2 months ago?
So this one is in 2016. He made a number of people cry there because he was just threatening them. It was trying to scare them because he didn't believe, and the council didn't believe, that there should be street performance there. So they tried to scare people into leaving. At this time in 2016, he went up to a guy with an acoustic guitar and issued him a CPN for noise, acoustic guitar on the Strand, one of the busiest, most used roads in London, constant traffic, constant noise.
You wouldn't have to hear the guitar.
It's so obvious that it's a policy of intimidation. So obvious. And so very recently he was put on job in Covent Garden to deal with buskers that were, when people put a donation in, allowing people to take CDs. And he went to a lady, took all her CDs, took her equipment, and tried to issue her a fine. Once again, like all of the CPNs he issued, that had to be trailed back on because it was an intimidation tactic. These things aren't done within the remit of the law. They're done to intimidate and to oppress. It's meant to make people want to leave. It's to push the buskers out of the area. It's not to remedy a problem or a situation. So just before we move on to the final bits of this, in 2019, Holber hired a private police force. That's what they're described as. A private police force to go through Leicester Square. And they're the guys in the red jackets that you see there. They were there that day with the guy who was being incredibly noisy that we heard. Those guys were requested by buskers of the busking community to deal with that guy a few days previously. And they went up and said, can you turn it down? And then left him be. Didn't call Westminster Council, didn't get them involved, didn't try and deal with that stuff. This was after 9 when they called him, so he's breaking the law at this point. So it's just continuous evidence of Westminster Council not holding up to their duty. And because they don't hold up to their duty, it then looks like we need to give them absolute control over the way that we operate in public places. They're incompetent, they act illegitimately, and then after that incompetence, the oppression, after using laws wrongly for years, they then make a grab to control everything. And they will control everything. Within the licensing system they propose, you have to stop when a council official speaks to you and asks you to stop, no matter what. Their request can be completely unreasonable, but you have to stop. All power is given to them. All reasonableness, all will to engage reasonably with your surrounding is gone. You dance to their tune.
Maybe it's to go to us not moaning too much.
It is called whining on.
Yes, whining on. We're both whining and getting angry and ranting and the rest of it. I've got to find some notes here. Covent Garden, which I called the good.
Yeah.
It's very interesting history. I've got a note here.
Can I just check? Are we the ugly then? Covent Garden's the good.
No,
Westminster Council's the bad. And are we the ugly?
No, well, we could be the ugly. No, I could be the ugly. Right. So Covent Garden, Samuel Pepys, 1662, is supposedly seen. He saw a Punch and Judy act there. There is a garden of all sorts of things that happened. Coffee bars, politics, prostitution. Over the years, all this existed in Covent Garden. Now, we got to a certain point in 1970s, early 70s, I think, where I'm not sure who, probably the GLC, decided they wanted to redevelop the whole area, knock everything down, build all these concrete wonders. And at that time, the community, oh my God, they were amazing. And in 1971, I've got a note here, the Covent Garden Community Association was created to fight the redevelopment plans. And by golly, they did. And the redevelopment plans were virtually finished. They were ready. They were almost done, almost signed, sealed and delivered. And the Community Association and the Covent Garden, ordinary people living in the area, stopped it. Yes. Great. Absolutely great. So for a few years after the market had gone, we get to the point, 1980, the new Covent Garden is created. And we suddenly have a shopping centre, restaurants, cafes, beautiful. And at that point, the community had set up some people to bring in theatre, street performers started to happen there. So we see the development of street performance, street communities, street theatre, all happening post-1980. Although I believe, and I'm not sure about this, I think there were some performers pre-1980 who were performing before the reopening in 1980. That to deal with, yes, there was, because there was a road and traffic and they were having to deal with that, but they still managed. So what we have also in 1988, a Covent Garden Trust was set up to protect and conserve the historic Covent Garden. And that was really important. And there's all sorts of things in the law that set out, which means that historic buildings cannot be affected. And this Covent Garden Trust is really important in preserving the area. And the owners of Covent Garden can't very easily go against what Covent Garden Trust is saying. So we've got all this. So you solely have street performing, developing, and all these amazing things happen. And I know my period, which I think was in the 1990s, being so old, I can't actually remember. I do remember being with Eddie Izzard and going to a meeting to as reps to negotiate with Covent Garden Market. And I believe a woman I know called Patty Webb, I believe she sat with Eddie at one point and they made up a code of conduct. So here we see Covent Garden Market, reps from street performers working together to create a code of conduct and to make everything work. Very few complaints. It's all working. All the different, you've got loads of different spots. So you've got on the West Piazza, as we both know, there's a place for circle shows. On the East Piazza, there's 2 places for music shows. On the James Street, there is, I think there was 5 spaces for statue acts. And on the corner of James Street, there's somewhere called Magic Corner, which is for magic acts. Everybody agrees and goes along with certain ways to deal with it. The musicians deal with, I forgot one spot. Oh my God. There is the classical music and the opera singers. What is it? Crusting Pie area?
It's next to the Crusting Pie. They call it the Pit. It's a downstairs area where there's tables and chairs and it's like a European terrace.
Yeah, absolutely great. So you've got all these different forms of entertainment and everyone has their own system. So there's not lots of arguments.
Can I quickly say this? No. That the musician spaces, the magician spaces, the statue spaces are all going to be gone in the license. They are not included within the plan of the licensing. It will be illegal if Westminster get their way.
Let's stick
to
with
anyone
the good
in those areas.
I'm trying to stick with the good and the happy. So we've got in the 1990s a code of conduct. 2008, that's when Pete Dobbing, Andy Christie and Mark Rothman negotiated with the owners then, which I believe was Capco. They negotiated another code of practice. And we even had a license system. Everybody had a little card to show. And it was all agreed with Capco, but Westminster were kept out of that. Westminster agreed not to participate.
Westminster gave the entertainment's license for the whole area, and then what was done within that area, within the entertainment's license, was up to Capco and the SPA, the Covent Garden performers, that jointly managed together.
Yes. So here you have this big company, the owners, meeting up with the street performers, agreeing a code of practice. Hallelujah. It's all working. Everybody's happy. And we have to put in context that in Covent Garden, it's a world-recognized place. Tourists come from all over the world. Tourists come from Great Britain, from Newcastle, from Sunderland, from Birmingham. They come to London, and a lot of people come to Covent Garden. I think I've got a note here from Capco on their website. It says there's 40 million visits a year to Covent Garden. It's ginormous. And you have this lovely mixture of shops, stalls, Jubilee Market, inside the Covent Garden Market itself. There's stalls, there is restaurants, there's cafes, there's restaurants that are not high end. We've got high end restaurants that are very expensive. You've got the whole mix. And then you've got in that, you've got the street performers all around the area creating atmosphere. I mean, it's brilliant. When you come, you know, in the summer, I've walked out, and I know the place, walked out, turned right out of Covent Garden Tube, and it's brilliant. You walk down James Street, and there's all these statues and people standing round and laughing. A bit further along, you've got magicians. And, you know, God, I stop and watch some and go, whoa, that's amazing. And how good they are. And then you go towards the East Piazza, and there's people like Terry who's playing his own music, singer-songwriter, absolutely fantastic. Go to the West Piazza, which is a really strange place to perform because it's one big space, and you see performers who can actually walk out to a massive empty space, and within 10 minutes they've got an audience, and 15, 20 minutes they've got a massive audience. I know from my own time when I was performing, it always used to shock me. I'd be really nervous before I went on, and within 5-8 minutes or 10 minutes, I've suddenly got a big audience. Where did they come from?
But people come there to see culture. They come there to absorb culture, and it's culture for every spectre of British society, right from homeless people sitting around the corner watching it, not a pot to piss in, all the way up to the people who are in the very top gamut of society, all gathered together to appreciate culture on the street.
Yes. So we've got a social ecology there of street performers, restaurants, cafes, businesses. It all works. The street performers are world famous. I've put down, it's the #1 tourist destination, both nationally and internationally. And if only,
but can we focus on something?
One sec.
Yeah.
If people want to look at TripAdvisor, they'll see loads of rave reviews for the performers that work in Covent Garden. It's brilliant.
But the reason why we have such great street performers there, I'd argue, is because of the community. It's because of the way the art and the culture is garnered there. It's the way that people learn there. If you look back on some of the interviews here, time and time again, what you see on that place is that people go there inexperienced or with little to no experience, and the community of performers around there teach those people, and they grow in experience and ability and capability.
Talk about it. It's like a university.
Yes,
where people can learn. And what's amazing is that I saw over the years, sometimes you get this most amazing acts that come from abroad. I remember one guy, he was one of the leading lights in Cirque du Soleil. He was performing on the West Piazza. We're all looking going, what skill?
Well, the guy, Gillian, the guy who created Cirque du Soleil, worked in Covent Garden in the late 80s. If you look at Stomp, you mentioned them before, worked in Covent Garden.
Yes,
Eddie Izzard.
Hang on, Stomp were called Pookie Snapperburger before they become Stomp. And they went on to have a regular spot in one of the main theatres in the West End. And they had regular spots in main theatres all around the world. This was an amazing export for England, Britain.
But one of the things with this is that once you get, and I'm sorry to keep dragging it back to negative, but this is a negative thing that's going to happen, is once you get the licensing system, all those itinerant performers will not be able to perform.
Before we leave the good, I want to make this point.
But you'll be able to make the point in a second. This is just on point. Just let me have this one bit, if you don't mind. So all the itinerant performers, all the people who travel, all the people, like a couple of people I hope to have on here in the future, who started off as homeless people and now are successful people who run theatres and circuses. All these people will not be given access to that place through that licensing system. All the people who are living in vans, traditional circus people who move from town to town in vans, will not be given access to that place.
Yeah,
the community that grows there will not be nurtured with the Westminster license. I'm sorry, you carry on with the good. I just had to spit some poison in the pot.
You and your poison. So we've got an example from 1980 till now of a system that works, and it's been negotiated between the street performers and the owners of Covent Garden. And there's been different owners, but every time there's been renewal of negotiations, and it's worked. We know it works. So if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So even if you just took Covent Garden on its own, even if Westminster should be coming on bended knees to us and the owners of Covent Garden and say, how do you do it? How do you make this work? But they're not doing that. And instead of trying to have this sham consultation, they should be on bended knees coming to Covent Garden, learning what works there, and taking it into Leicester Square and Trafalgar Square. We have a system that works. It's there. It can be shown to them. The performers would love to help. I know that. And it's crazy. Why they have sham culture?
But you know why this is happening?
Good. Wait a minute. 40 years. I'm ranting. 40 years of making a system work. It's superb.
This is the thing, is what they'll say Busking London did that. This is the thing you hear time and time again. They go, oh, Busking London did that, it didn't work. But what happened with Busking London was it was a music PR company who didn't understand the street, didn't know how it worked.
Yeah.
So Busker didn't buy into that.
All right.
Buskers have...
Wait, because that's what I'm pointing out. It's 40 years of experience in Covent Garden. It's passed through, and people, my God, I'm involved in this. I don't street perform anymore. I know Mark Rothman is involved in this. This is a guy who used to be a street
owner
performer.
of the top secret comedy club, most successful comedy club in London right now, I believe.
Absolutely. So we have this guy who's actually become an amazing entrepreneur with a comedy club. He wants to get involved. I haven't seen him for a long time, but I believe Eddie Izzard is involved.
I spoke to him personally. He's involved, yeah.
So we've got people going right back who understand and know what worked, yet Westminster don't want to learn from what worked.
But do you know what they want to do? It's simple as this. Heart for London or Heart of London bid, they want to have the place cleared. They want to have a few violinists. They want to curate the place. The main thing they're screaming and calling for, which they're not getting, is they want to be able to do auditions and set who works there. Now, there was auditions and is auditions in Covent Garden, but the auditions in Covent Garden are just to make sure you're safe. It's to make sure you're safe and you have some knowledge of how to do it. And that audition is only for the big circle shows. The musicians queue up. The magicians queue up. The statues pick their spots. It's open access throughout majority of Covent Garden. Throughout majority of London, it's open access. And I believe it has to be. The license system...
we show the way. And now they want to bring the license system in Covent Garden. And we know that will destroy what's already there. And
it will.
This is, hang on, I'm going to go on another rant. I feel it coming on. A time of COVID, yes. A time of COVID, the streets of London are devoid of people. There are some people, but it's much quieter than it used to be. And being someone who's grown up in London, I know what London could be like. I've spent hours in the centre of London.
But it's not going to be like that forever, is it?
No, but we got COVID at the moment. We have the theatres closed, the music venues pretty much closed. The street has got a history of providing culture, art, atmosphere. It makes people feel good. It creates connection between people. It actually helps people's mental health. I remember one time I did a show. It's an anecdote. And this guy really blew me away. It was incredible. I did my show, and this guy was up in the Punch and Judy, which is a pub with a balcony above the West Piazza. I went up to collect some money for anybody who'd watched the show. One guy stops me, and he says, "Man, you were fabulous. I've had the worst year that I've ever had. I haven't smiled or laughed once for a year." Whether it's true or not, that's what he told me. He said, "You've just made my day, and you've made me turn over a new leaf." And in fact, he gave me £100 tip, which is like, oh, crazy. Lost me microphone. I'm getting so excited.
Yeah. But I think that's something that a lot of performers can share in. They've had that experience. People come up to them and saying, "You've made my day. You've made my week. You've made my year." Absolutely. Performance in the public spaces creates something special, and the ability for people from all spectra of society, not just the people who can afford to have a gap year doing it or have the right coloured pens and pencils, but everybody being able to do this thing is vital.
Right.
It's vitally important.
Finishing my rant. What was a good example with that guy is it actually helps people's mental health. He'd had a terrible year, depressed. Suddenly, he's going, whoa, things feel better. He's got the beginning step to start finding his way back into his life. And you can see Covent Garden, you can see the atmosphere, the smiles, the connection, all the things that are difficult to get during COVID, performers bring. They bring it in lashes of it.
Yeah, I agree. And Westminster say that what they're doing is a light touch license, but it's not a light touch license. We both know that.
We both know
If
that.
you-
We both know it's a sham consultation. If they wanted to do real consultation, they would study Covent Garden and find out why it works, how it works, and then bring that into play.
Let's talk about how it's a sham consultation. There's about 10,000 people living in the West End ward. There's about 250,000, 250,000 people who are transient workers who come in every day into the West End ward. How many people did they get in their consultation? 700 people. 700 people. 180, I think, of them, maybe, I'm not entirely sure on the figure there, were performers. So almost a third of them are performers. So they've managed to get about 400 people out of 10,000 and out of 250,000 transient workforce, with a bid group, with two bid groups, in fact, so North Bank are the same, are desperate for that. One of the things we didn't touch on before with Trafalgar Square, the guy who manages and runs the gallery, the artistic director of the gallery, has gone on threat, turn around and say he does not like performance. I didn't have a chance to get it. I've been so busy getting all these stuff. I can find it right now, though, if you want to fill in the gap for a second.
No, that means I have to fill in the gap. And I've already been panting for ages.
Once again, I'll put it in the doobly-doo. The artistic director of the National Gallery at Trafalgar Square said he thought that the performances there were an eyesore. He believed that this shouldn't be here. That it's not fitting for the regal nature of the National Gallery. And he said that on multiple articles with newspapers. He didn't want it there. He wanted plans to make a garden there, anything but get rid of what it was originally built by Ken Livingstone for, street performance. And lo and behold, inside the licenses they have now, despite there not being a single noise complaint for shows on the North Terrace, shows that they claim is the noise complaints is what they claim is the major issue, why they're having to do this license. Not one single complaint on the North Terrace, but yet there's no shows there. They're going to get rid of all the show pictures in Trafalgar Square, all of them, despite there being no noise complaints. And that's simply because of taste. It's once again, like that lady said at the beginning of the interview when I talked about this, it should be a place for quiet reflection. It's ideological. It's done on their desire for the aesthetic for the city. It's not done with a will to actually remedy people who are suffering from nuisance.
I actually would, I'm being naughty now or nasty or something. I think they should be replacing that guy at the National Gallery because it seems like, I don't know him, I've never met him, but it seems like what he wants in the National Gallery is a certain sort of person, a certain sort of well-off, rich, middle-class person, and not anybody else. And
I told you,
the whole point of the National Gallery and all these things, the museums in London, all this wonderful resource that we have in London, because it's a great city, is everybody can go, not just one group of people, and it should be accessible to everybody. Why should it just be a small bunch of people who go in there? And I know it's free to go in, but you know, with that sort of attitude, you feel like he doesn't really like a certain sort of person.
Definitely is that, you know. I get that, and he definitely doesn't like the sort of person that would do street performance. Think about Trafalgar Square, okay, or Leicester Square, or any of these other places. What's happened is tens of people, in some cases in Trafalgar Square, you know, 50 people, 60 people have managed to work together. They've managed to organise and find a way to cooperate together, for the majority part, cooperate harmoniously without having the council coming in and, you know, being an overarching authority to make them work together. They've done it naturally. That's a beautiful thing, with a little bit of nurturing, with a little bit of aid from Westminster instead of opposition and in force against it. These things could run without no issue whatsoever.
I've missed something. I missed something in talking about the good. There was a point in time where myself and 3 others created an entertainment company, and we did it off the back of big help from, I think it was Guardian Royal Exchange Properties, and I'm pretty certain, in fact I am certain, that the manager at the time was a man called Peter Scott, and he arranged that we would have an office and a budget to put on X amount of festivals in Covent Garden. And 3 of us, out of the 4 were street performers or ex-street performers. And suddenly there was this wonderful connection between the management and the performers or ex-performers. And we put on, where was it? Where did I put my note? Loads of, we put on a magic festival, a dance festival, a street festival, a circus festival, a May Day festival, a Bastille Day festival. We did it all in conjunction with the other street performers because I didn't want to see, being a street performer myself, I didn't want to see people losing too much work. We worked it together as much as possible. We got street performers to be part of the festivals. We always try to get street performers in the festival because they're good performers and they're good in public spaces. So it was brilliant. So there you had the owners, Guardian Royal Exchange Properties, through the manager, Peter Scott, putting in place a way that not only could street performers do street shows, but they could also put on festivals. Why did he do that? Not just out the goodness of his heart or because he liked us or anything else, because it brings footfall, lots of people coming there, going to the shops, going to the restaurants, going to the cafes. That's what it's about. And the more atmosphere, the bigger it is, the more people come there. So you have people from all over the world. They come and see Covent Garden. They see the things happening. They go back home. They tell their mates. I spent some time in China teaching theatre. Everywhere I went, people would say to me, "Oh, we've heard about this place to visit, Covent Garden, where there's performers," because they don't have that in China. And, you know, it's just amazing. And this is a major resource for art. And that's the good.
Well,
that's the good. And
shall we
want to destroy the good?
Should we talk about the positive then? Let's end this because we said we weren't going to do a massive long 2-hour rant for this, and we've got to just about to click over to an hour and a half.
I looked and I was going, oh my God, we've gone on and on and on and on.
So let's look at the licensing that Westminster is proposing. Now, the issue with the license is that it's going to be exclusive. It's used to remove people. It's going to ban amplification in most of the city. So instead of doing this, what can they do that's better? So one of the things that WSPA put forward over the years to Westminster and tried to get them to engage
Wait, you have to say what the WSPA is.
The WSPA is a Westminster Street Performers Association. So the group you talked about in Covent Garden that set up the Code of Conduct is the Covent Garden Street Performers Association. And that's been going for about 25 years, nearly 30 years now. The Westminster SPA was set up about 5 years ago. And it's talked about it being, you know, very short-lived and it's only come in the last year or whatever. That's nonsense. We've been dealing with the council since the breakup of Busking London. When Busking London was beginning to break up, and when it was in action, we formed our own SPA as a way of trying to represent ourselves there. Because people had been working there for about 10 years coming up for now, it started to make sense. People were moving together as a group. We'd formed a community. And so when we did that, we said, look, we want to work with you. There are people creating problems. We want to help you deal with those problems, like I've talked about time and time again in this interview. So the positive things Westminster can do. They wanted to set up a forum so residents, business interests, the bid groups can negotiate and talk with the street performers. Great, brilliant. Spend your money, Westminster, on doing that. Westminster said at the same time as that, they want to encourage performers to have a code of conduct and to sign up to the WSPA, sign up to the performers associations. Brilliant, Westminster. Do that. That's great. But all of that stuff will only be helpful if Westminster then, at the same time as that, have a reasoned way to remedy issues with people who are going to flout the code, who are going to act unreasonably.
Which we know Westminster, they don't.
Which they're not at the moment.
Oh,
they have.
I've just seen Sir Graham Scott has actually written in the comments, and it's a lovely line which kind of describes Westminster Council Kafka-esque.
Yeah, I do agree. It's all smoke and mirrors to some extent, and this is the problem: is we hold our hands out and have done for years in good faith, and we get treated in bad faith. When this is kind of typical of the way Westminster deals with things. When I had my court case, when I was going for the appeal, the guy who's now the head of enforcement, Andy, he came down, as well as my memory serves me, before my court case. The head of enforcement, the guy's working on this policy right now. The guy who sat in the committee meetings, and I will put them in the doobie-doo. I couldn't find them before the interview because I've been so rushed. You'll see the amount of stuff I've got up there. He said in the meetings that they can't deal with street performance. They don't have the powers to do it. Absolute nonsense. When they went for the committee review just recently, I think it was in September, he admitted that number 2 bylaw can be used to deal with noise nuisance, but said, oh, well, we can't be everywhere at once, which is the same issue with the license.
Again, looking at one of the comment, my mate sees the oddball. Where is it? We have to make creativity high profile. And, you look at COVID, actors can't work, musicians can't work. The one last thing left in London, and they want to destroy it.
We should be
musicians are out of work and actually come on the street now and attempt to do street. People who do theatre could come out and try and do some shows. It gives them a chance. But this Kafkaesque local government want to try and get rid of it all.
But this is the same thing. But they can't admit they want to get rid of it all now because they've lost too many times. When they did the Operation Spotlight, they lost so heavily. They had PMs. They had what's the name of the guy? Norman Baker, who was one of the executives in the cabinet at the time, told them not to do this. They had a huge amount of weight against this Operation Spotlight. So they know now. They're not stupid. They realise they can't just try and get rid of it all. So instead,
one sec. In the comments, we've got one of the people who actually created the 2008 Code of Practice, Andy Christie.
There you go. Hey, Andy. So they know they can't admit it. They can't admit they want to get rid of it. So what they'll do is they'll turn around and say, we appreciate this the contribution that street performers make to Westminster and its culture, as they quietly put their hands around it and choke it to death. They're quietly trying to kill it while smiling and saying they appreciate it. They are, for all extensive reasons, all extensive logic, getting rid of it. They're going to clear most of the streets of London. They put a few pitches around, and everywhere else it'll be against the law. Everywhere else. So we need to stop them doing that. And we've got to tie this up at some point soon. We've got to stop them doing that.
I don't know how.
I'm getting to it. We've got to stop them doing that. We've got to compel them to work with SPAs and use laws in place to deal and remedy actual issues. I hate to say this, but if a bid group doesn't like street performance, it's not your decision what happens in public spaces. We can work with you and we can make the space better. And if they cooperate with us, we can deal and remedy the issues they have. They shouldn't be able to curate it.
No, and it's sterilising public space. I really don't like it. I could give an example of somewhere where they've destroyed a street in London that used to have an amazing culture, and it was a music culture. It's where people met to create bands.
Drury Lane. Was it not Drury Lane?
Not Drury Lane.
Buddy, what am I thinking of? What's the bloody name place? You carry on talking. I'm going to think of it.
You think of it. They're going to put into place all sorts of nice things in their big buildings, but the culture that existed in that street, you could find anything. There was loads of small entrepreneurs, amplifier builders, guitar specialists. I had a friend there who was an expert on making rock guitars. He was absolutely brilliant. He's made it for many very famous people. He's now gone because he lost his space there. He's gone.
Anyone knows it, put it in the comments. I'm driving myself mad for it. But this is something that happens time and time again, is that these large business interests want to Denmark Street. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andy. So yes. Time and time again, large big business interests have a vision, and their vision is to serve a small minority of businesses. Not even all the businesses. It's the highest bankrolling businesses in the area. And then the culture, the street culture, gets wiped clean. The second that we give all our power, our decision-making to Westminster as a street culture, so can we stop having the public negotiation in public places, is the second that we are completely victim to that. And we will become victims to it.
Well, I'm again being a bit over the top, but their way of doing things is almost North Korean. in its way. Because in a democracy, and we live in a democracy, and I grew up in a democracy, and I don't want to use it in a very generalized, simplistic way, like in the way that many populists use that word, but it just meaning that we vote for things in. We have a public, Westminster Council has loads of people who live there, but it's not just the people who live there, it's all the people that visit. And you've got liberty in a democracy on one side and control, and you actually have to have a certain amount of control. So you need to have police. If I get hit over the head or someone mugs me, I actually would like a policeman to be there to help me out and to protect me. So you've got this balance between liberty and control. And what Westminster Council are doing is going towards control and forgetting liberty. It's really tragic. It's terrible. It's not acceptable. And it's reducing art. It's reducing creativity. It's reducing what London is. It's reducing our historic culture. I'm ranting again.
But the sad thing is they're doing it because it's through laziness and ineptitude. They have powers to deal with the issues they're claiming they're doing this for. They could do it with a slow, reasoned, consistent approach to enforcement.
Which we said, Covent Garden gives them an example. Why don't they just come and learn? Not difficult, not rocket science.
At this moment, I'd say everyone is watching. You need to go and fill out the consultation. You need to push that as hard as possible. When the consultation goes through, they'll probably ignore it anyway, and they're going to try and push this through committee, I'm sure. When it comes to being pushed through committee, we don't have to give up then. We keep fighting, we keep pushing. This will make, as I said, performance in the entire borough near enough unlawful if you don't have a license. So then that's the time when we all go to Westminster and we all start performing in every section where we can. We show it to be the brutality is. They claim it's a light touch license. So let's show how light their touch is when they come to enforce it.
Something we haven't pointed out or we've hinted at. What we guess is, and you said you actually mentioned this before, when the crackdowns don't work, is the danger, certainly in Covent Garden, because it's all very well organised, the danger if they bring this licensing in, that the whole street performing ecology will break up, not immediately, and you will get loads of rogue performers who will jump in, perform and jump out again and be very loud.
Well, that's one of the sad things about this. The reasonable people, the people who actually want to work with other people are going to be people who get hurt the most by this. The people who queue up, the people who share, the people who watch their volumes, the people who work during the daytime when there's less noise issues going on, there's less of these problems happening. They're the people that are going to be made, criminals for not behaving in a light.
I want to say something else. The other people who are going to be hurt is, I know Covent Garden much better than I do Leicester Square.
Yeah.
The stall holders, the restaurants, the cafes, when the footfall starts to go because people hear that the wonderful atmosphere there is disappearing, and that will affect footfall. So who's that going to affect? The people who work there, the businesses there, but more than that, all the people from all over Britain and all over the world who come to see these performances, and they love it, and it makes them happy and it makes them feel good. So they go in the cafes and spend money. It all works together. So who's going to get hurt? The ordinary performers who work together, the people who come for the atmosphere, the tourists from England, the tourists from abroad, the businesses. Everyone's going to get hurt because Westminster Council think they know about the street and they don't. And what's the name of those people?
Rebecca Gordon and Kirsty Munro. And the sad thing with what they're going to do is that the people who create problems are going to carry on anyway. The people who are playing all the way through the night, already breaking the law, are going to carry on anyway. The people who are playing music so incredibly loud that it's obviously causing a problem are going to carry on anyway. And as Andy said, the head of enforcement in Westminster Council, they can't be everywhere at once. So they're going to have the same problem they have now. The only difference is the reasonable people, the people who care and actually are bothered about the community. The mass majority of artists engaged in the capital are the people that are going to lose out and be hurt the most.
And what we see in Covent Garden is, in terms of police in the area, putting it bluntly, the street performers who work there try to make sure it works and try to make sure that we keep within the boundaries of a code of practice. When those people start to go, there's no one to control it, and it becomes the Wild West.
Well, look at Camden. Camden brought in a licensing a number of years ago, and now they've brought in the licensing. It costs them escalating costs of £40,000-50,000 a year to run their license, and the complaints haven't gone down. Since they brought in the license, the complaints have gone up anyway, because you've still got the rogues who took the piss before doing the same thing. What they've done is they destroyed the community that was there. I used to work in Camden. I still do now, but I work on AMP, and it's my way of, you know, moving around their licensing, which I have to say, Westminster Council, I will be doing with you too. You're not going to stop me. But what happens there now is the community that was there, that used to self-manage, work together, they used to talk about things, they used to try and work out ways to work together, they're gone. Someone walks up to a pitch and they've got their 5 hours that Camden Council allocated them, and they blast out as long as they want for those 5 hours. It solved nothing. It spent money, and it destroyed a culture. It destroyed a possibility of improvement.
Right. How about if you say all the ways that people who are watching this can support the street performers against Westminster Council, and wrap up like that? So it's all the things that people could do to help us, and the ways that they can contact other people and just generally help this. And, you know, we know the Musicians Union and everything else. Mention them, how they're involved.
Yeah. So if you're a musician, contact the Musicians Union. If you're an actor or a performer, a circus entertainer, juggler, magician, contact Equity. Talk to your unions. There's a Facebook site called Save London Buskers. Go to that, share that, promote that. Go to the consultation. I will be putting all of this in the doobly-doo after the interview. So check by in 10 minutes after this. You'll see it. If you're watching it recorded, it'll already be there. So fill out the consultation. Write letters, emails. I will also put the email address of Rebecca Gordon and Kirsty Munro in the doobly-doo after this. So check by in 10 minutes. That stuff will all be there after. If you're watching this after the date of the interview, it'll be there ready for you.
He's much more organised than me. Yeah, go on.
I've been working for days to get this stuff right, and I've still missed out so much. Any way you can support, keep looking at Save London Buskers. It'll have updates on there. Talk to your busking friends, do the consultation, send letters to Westminster Council, talk to any friends you have who are celebrities or high-level people, talk to your MPs, anybody you think of who could add to this fight, talk to them. Now, I've spoke to a lot of people at the moment, and unfortunately, we are one of 1,000 causes that are getting pressed upon at this time. It's a difficult time, but we will not get this opportunity again. Once the license goes through, we can battle it for a few months and try and turn it over. We might do. I have a lot of plans myself, so contact me if you're interested, if this does go through next year, of fighting this. But if they get this license in within a year or two, the culture will be gone and it will never come back. So any way you can, all the things I've mentioned, just try. We can do it.
Everything he said. That's that way. Everything he said.
So I suppose from now I'll say thank you everyone for listening. We've rattled on for quite some time now. We truly did whine on about it. I hope you have a good one. I will put all the descriptions in right now at the end of this video, so we'll be there very, very soon. From me, goodbye everyone.
From me, goodbye everyone.